Hello, welcome to your next unit. I'm Brian Case from PPL Corporation.
I'm Mike Polisi from PPL.
We're happy to have you with us today. Just to tell you a little bit about PPL Corporation. PPL is a Fortune 250 energy company headquartered in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And we are currently about the number 7 energy corporation in the U.S. We have about 18,000 employees, and we hold assets in the state of Pennsylvania, Louisville, Kentucky, Montana, and we own about a third of the power distribution in the United Kingdom. We have a large internship program at PPL Corporation, and my responsibility as the academic relations manager is to both recruit at the universities as well as manage the internship program for PPL. Mike?
And my responsibility is, I work very closely with Brian in terms of coordinating the internship program for our IT department. But that's, I'll say on a technical day-to-day basis, I focus on cybersecurity. So I do get to work very closely with Brian, attend career fairs, review a lot of resumes, and interview candidates and hire those candidates for summer internships at PPL.
And just a little further information about the internship program at PPL. This year we have the largest program ever. We have 128 interns with us this summer. And I'm happy to say that over 30 of them are from 7 different Penn State campuses. In fact, approximately 10% of the PPL employee population in the state of Pennsylvania are from Penn State. So we do a lot of work with the Penn State campuses.
Yes, we do.
So we're here today to talk to you about some very important preparation for your career. So why don't we start with resumes. Just to give you a general idea, we at PPL and probably other large corporations like PPL deal with a high volume of resumes. This year for our internship program, for example, we had over 3,900 applicants for 128 summer internship opportunities. That is a lot of resumes for our recruiters to look at. So it's very, very important that your resume be prepared in a manner that is going to be easily read and will certainly quickly distinguish you among your competition. So some things to keep in mind, and Mike, please feel free to jump in. Certainly the layout is very important. Making sure that it's very clear, formatted in a way that's easy to read, and usually there should be some white space so that it's not jammed with information, allowing the recruiter to make any notes that they might want to make on the resume. GPA, certainly very important to include that GPA at the top of the resume along with your major and your school, so that's very quickly identified. It is said that resumes get about a 10-second review. So you want to capture the reader's attention right at the top of the resume. Mike, how about some other things you would look for as a hiring manager?
Sure. So just to build on one of the previous comments that Brian had made is make sure your resume has some white space and it's not jam-packed full of information. As a traditional student that doesn't have a lot of job experience, you want to make sure that your resume is easy to read, it's short, concise, to the point, and is not excessive in length, because as a traditional student you have not necessarily had a lot of full-time job experience. So your resume doesn't need to be 2, 3, or even 4 pages. Keep it short, to the point, high-level information that's going to catch the reviewer's eyes, and try to keep it to really 1 page. 1 page is a perfect length for, I'll say, an internship or a new college grad.
Right.
Now, for a non-traditional student, you may have already had some full-time work experience, so your resume would likely be a little bit longer, and that's perfectly fine. We expect that, and it's perfectly understandable as we review it.
Now, some of the other things that we would definitely look for on a resume would include indication of prior experience. Certainly prior experience that is related to what you're doing is important if you have that. But oftentimes for your first internship that may not be the case. So if you do not have that prior experience, then other things that would be important include would be any indication of leadership experience. We are looking for future leaders in our company. So students who are coming in that have led projects, are very involved in campus aside from their curricular activities. We look for involvement in clubs, organizations, and particularly for those who have stepped up and took on leadership or officer roles. We also look for projects, classroom projects that you took on elsewhere that would be related in some way perhaps, or just an indication that you have that project experience. And something else that's very important from a PPL corporation value perspective is we look at citizenship. So is there an indication that the student is volunteering, active in the community in some way, or active on campus?
Another important but often overlooked item is the objective statement on your resume too. Make sure that it is customized to the position, to the company, highlighting your skills and interests for that particular position that you're looking for. Don't use a blanket statement that is very generic that you would use for hand in the same exact resume to 10 different companies across 10 different industry verticals.
Probably important that we talk about some of the potential pitfalls or things to watch as well. Number one on the list, by all means, is typos. Beyond the spell check, we always recommend that you get a second pair of eyes to review the resume. Very important.
Yeah, do not depend entirely on the spelling and grammatical check that you would have in Microsoft Word or any other word processing utility that you would use.
And one thing to be very careful of, we have seen some instances where track changes in using Word, for example. There might be indications that they were tracking the changes, and instead of saving the actual format, we received some resumes that show all of the changes that were tracked. So another potential pitfall to watch out for.
I really can't stress enough the importance of leveraging career services, because we can easily tell when we receive a resume that candidate A certainly leveraged the resources that were available to them, but candidate B just decided to take a template that they found on the internet by performing a Google search and thought that this might be a good starting point for it. So it's pretty easy to distinguish the two when we receive those resumes.
Right. Something else to keep in mind, this is your marketing document. This is the first exposure that a company will have to you and your branding. So make sure that your branding is on target. It is what you want to be representative of who you are. Something else to keep in mind, we recommend not including photos on a resume. We also really would not recommend putting personal hobbies and also references. Depending who you talk to, some will recommend that. But from our perspective, if we like your resume, if we decide to move through the hiring process, at that point, if resumes or contacts or references are needed, we would come back to the candidates and ask for that information. So when we say limit your resume to one page, that's certainly something that we would not be expecting or looking for.
Right. And one final thing that I'd like to mention, it really, I'll say, starts to bridge the gap to the next topic that we'll cover shortly, is really around overselling and underselling yourself in the resume. Well, Brian had mentioned, don't oversell or under yourself in the resume. If you do so, keep in mind that you're going to be asked during your interview process to talk about your experiences, your qualifications that you have in the resume. So if you oversell yourself,
right,
and it may look good to me as a interviewer or to Brian in HR, and then we have an interview with you and we ask you to expand upon that, it's going to be very easy for us to see and quickly to determine that that wasn't exactly an entirely accurate statement that was on your resume, and it was referred to as resume inflation at that point. So you definitely want to avoid that. Not only are there impacts to your resume to have that information on there, but there are downstream impacts associated with the interview process if you're successful in making to that step.
Okay, how about if we move on to cover letters? Certainly a very important part of the application process is the cover letter. And just like the resume, the cover letter certainly brands you and who you are. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind with the cover letter is be consistent with your resume. If you're saying something in your cover letter that isn't consistent with your resume, certainly a red flag will go up. One of the other things you want to do is, just like Mike had mentioned about personalizing the resume to the position being applied for, customizing. Very important to do that with your cover letter as well. You want to make sure that you're addressing the company that you're applying to and indicating that you know something about the company. Important that they know that you did your research and there's something that you know.
Cover letter should not be pages and pages upon information as to why you think it's a great company that you're applying to, why you feel that you'd be the perfect candidate for the position. My recommendation would be to keep it as close to one page, if at all possible.
Right. And then being as specific as you can and clear about your experience and how it relates to the position that you're applying to. Oftentimes, and probably in this course, you've heard about keywords. If you're looking at a job description, both for your resume and for your cover letter, it's important that you point out some of those same keywords, assuming that you have that background or that experience or that skill. Clearly, you want to point that out so that there's a match. Many corporations use systems to do the initial screening. So if some of those keywords are not present or the basic qualifications are not being met, those resumes will not even touch human hands.
Right. Yeah, and in terms of getting the resume in somebody's hands, we talked. You may have heard in class previously that resume is not, or a cover letter rather, is not always required, but it's certainly nice to have, and it does separate your resume and your application from some of your peers because it shows that you've put a little bit more thought and time into the application process. But in terms of follow-up, though, it is important to realize that you're not being a nuisance if you do follow up. It's important for you to be persistent and follow through with that because, again, that's another item that'll set you apart from your peers that are applying to the same position as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about if we move on to preparing for the initial screening process, whether it's through a phone screen or Skype, or some companies are now beginning to use automated response online.
Services as
right.
well.
So some tips to keep in mind there. First of all, this is your first potential verbal conversation with a company. So again, keeping in mind your branding, who you want to represent, what kind of image you want to present is very important. So we always recommend professionalism, certainly in the event that it's on Skype or online, through a net meeting or what have you. Certainly your appearance is going to be very important. So dressing professionally would be recommended. Making sure in all of those instances that you're in an area that is quiet, that you will not be interrupted with pets or siblings or outside noise. Certainly keep in mind if you're on a cell phone that you're in an area where you're going to always have the connection. There are many instances where people might be driving and go through cells where there's no connectivity. So certainly keep in mind that you want to stay connected.
Yeah, definitely make sure you're in a quiet place, that your phone or your computer is fully charged if you're using a laptop and it's an online or a Skype interview. You certainly don't want to have your laptop die in the middle of the interview and then that just abruptly ended your conversation with a hiring manager at a company. So that's a simple, I'll say, task that you could really pay attention to. It's the minor details that certainly pay off dividends in the end. Make sure your phone is charged. Brian had mentioned, people driving, if drop in and out of call areas in between cell towers. Make sure you're not driving when you're on a phone interview. And it's easy to hear a lot of that background noise. And to that point, if you're at home and it's a phone interview or it's a Skype interview, you're doing it in your office or a room somewhere, close the door, make sure it's quiet. Close the window. You get a lot of outside noise. The neighbor's dog is barking in the background. I've heard that as well. So and make sure it's as similar to a in-person interview as possible where you wouldn't have those distractions, those outside noises and things like that.
Right. And I recall your your one story where someone on the phone actually stopped for gas during the phone interview. So, things like that obviously should be avoided, by all means.
Yes, especially if you're going to ask the interviewer to hold on for a second while you pay for the gas. It's never a good thing to do.
Something else to keep in mind, with the interview process is know the company. There's nothing worse than getting someone on the phone for that initial call, and there are instances where a recruiter will introduce themselves and indicate they're calling from PPL, and the person at the other end doesn't recall applying, or they say, I applied at 100 places, I don't remember what you do. So make sure that if you're applying somewhere, you're always prepared for that call. Don't be caught off guard. When you get the call, you need to be ready. And sometimes the recruiters will not give advance notice, and they'll call and say, this is your phone screen. So you always need to be prepared. Do your research. Just like we tell students going to a career fair, never go up to a table and say, who are you and what do you do? They always provide information at a career fair about the companies that are present. So research the companies that you want to visit at the career fair and do the same with the companies that you're applying to, so that when you get that call, you're ready.
Yeah, so you'd be ready to know at a high level what that company does, what that position is, it actually entails. But also don't be afraid to ask questions at the end of the interview. Generally at the end of the interview, you get an opportunity to ask the interviewers questions about a little bit more about the company, the position. So don't be afraid to ask, generally, what is a typical day in the life of a successful candidate working in this position? Ask questions about benefits. I've had questions where people ask me, what's the most challenging or exciting aspect of the job that you do, or what you feel will be most challenging or exciting for me as a potential hire in that position. That shows a little bit more initiative, like we talked about in the previous segment. But it also shows that you're extremely interested and you want to learn more. And then a lot of times you get that information back as part of those questions. You say, that's a really good point. I would look forward to that aspect of it, or I feel that I would be a good fit for a challenging position or in that situation because of X, Y, Z. You can actually continue, extend the interview process a little bit more by adding meaningful content to that conversation.
Right. Communication skills are also critical. Sometimes we hear, if I'm an engineer or if I'm a systems or computer person, I sit at my computer all day. I don't need to talk or communicate, and certainly not the case. Regardless of what position you are in, there's undoubtedly a need for both written and oral communications. And the phone screen or that first screening interview is going to be the first indication of those communication skills. So speak clearly, be prepared, and certainly be courteous as well. That's important.
That's always critical. One item that actually I just realized that I forgot to mention before is that Brian mentioned be prepared. If it's your first time on a Skype interview or an online interview, try to set everything up ahead of time. Maybe run through a Skype phone call with a peer, a friend, a coworker, a classmate, a parent of yours, or a sibling. Never used Skype before, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning, you have a 9:30 interview, and things don't go as smoothly as you would hope in terms of logging in for the first time or connecting, or maybe your headset doesn't work. It's important to make sure that stuff is all taken care of ahead of time. One, it's going to reduce the stress level for you, and two, it's going to make sure that at least the initial portion of the interview process, getting there on time, if you will, is going to work smoothly as possible.
And then certainly make sure that you ask about next steps, make sure that you are clear about the next steps, and I would always recommend restating that you have a clear understanding of what the next steps are, so that if there's anything that you need to do, that you're fully aware of what that is, and if there's a time that you should be following up, if you have not heard anything, you know when to do that.
Right. And then similarly, we had mentioned before about following up. Don't hesitate. If the answer to your next steps question is, we'll be in touch in a week or 2 weeks when we hope to finish all the interviewing of the other candidates, follow up, send an email thanking them for their time, and don't be afraid to ask them, is there any additional information that I can provide to help you in your decision-making process? Again, you're not going to be a pest. Don't worry about being a bother to them. Again, it shows initiative that you are interested.
And one tip that I always recommend during the interview process or that initial screening, you will undoubtedly have the opportunity to ask questions. So always ask a question. Be prepared, be insightful, and take every opportunity that you can to identify where the company may need help, where they have a problem to solve, where they would see utilizing your skills and abilities, and then take full advantage of that thank you that Mike referred to, and restate in that thank you that you heard during the interview that there's this problem, there's this need, there's this skill required, and this is what you will bring to the table. Companies are looking for problem solvers, and if you can indicate in some way that you will help them solve a problem, you are distinguishing yourself well above the person who either sends no thank you at all, or the person who sends the typical thank you for your time, I would be the best candidate for the job. So you're distinguishing yourself with even the thank you.
It's just to build on Brian's point about asking the questions. Ask at least one question. If we're in an interview and we get to the end of it and the candidate doesn't ask a single question, we're kind of left scratching our heads wondering, okay, wow, was the interview that well? Did we provide that much information? Is the candidate actually as interested in working here as he originally made it to us to believe as part of the interview process? So it's important to ask at least one question and have a list of questions. Maybe you ask a similar question for all the interviews that you go to, but have that list of questions in your back pocket so you're ready and you're not trying to think about them on the spot necessarily, because you're going to have a lot of things run through your head at that point in time and maybe drawing a blank. So be prepared.
Right.
Again, have that list of questions ahead of time going into that interview.
Okay, well, hopefully we provided you with some helpful insight for this unit of your class. We're happy to provide a perspective from a corporation located here in the Lehigh Valley. We hope it will help you be successful in your future endeavors and your career. Thank you.
Thank you.